I'm working with journeys as much as mobility. And I'm going to take you on a journey, a collage of different journeys actually, a non-linear collage. And perhaps it might begin with how, if we were entering a Melbourne tram, the hydraulic doors would open, there would be a level crossing and you would step up and tap on with your card. Entering a tram in Kolkata, you would rush across the street, dodging other forms of movement. You would grab the handrail in the open door and you'd just leap on while the tram's still going, and you'd hear the bell of the tram. Could you give me a bell about, 13 minutes, a couple of stops before I'm going to get off? I take open-ended journeys, so I don't actually know where we're going to end up in the next 15 minutes that we've got. I just know that I'm going to get off at my stop, and if you could ring the bell gently a couple of stops before I need to get off, that would be great. It's also a personal journey that I can share with you, but that is also perhaps an allegory of my generation and of an epoch, a historical epoch that we're all part of, but differently. So I am a fourth generation colonial settler descendant on the continent lands so-called Australia, and I'm a beneficiary of colonial processes of dispossession of the First Nations people of that continent who have lived there continuously, the said longest living civilization on Earth's systems. And it's not surprising perhaps that on my 17th birthday I already had a car lined up in the city on the west coast of Perth, and I got my driver's licence on my 17th birthday when I was eligible to just have a little bit more mobility in the vast spaces of that continent. My mobility is also not just of physical movement, but of course it's interlaced with social upward mobility. The rise of my parents from a rural, settler, opportunistic, working class background to move to an urban context, to be part of the post-war rising consumer society. That rise of social mobility is of course entangled with our physical mobility. As a settler culture living on the frontier west of that continent, I was very much a participant in this opportunistic, spacious exploration. So I started undertaking, I don't know whether artworks, design works, but working in the public domain with an interest in my own self-learning and a kind of public pedagogy which does not deliver answers as such, but more questions and ways in which we can cultivate inquiry. So for an arts festival in 1998, juxtaposed with Matthew Flinders, the heroic public art sculpture of the British colonial navigator who completed the circumnavigation mapping of this continent of Australia, if you like, the representational act of colonisation, juxtaposed with my work of downscaling and casting a caravan. There's a cultural recent tradition in Anglo-Celtic settler generations in Australian culture of what the author Tim Winton calls "See Australia Then Die," SADS. People of my generation and older who get their four-wheel drive vehicle, get a caravan on it and circumnavigate the interior of this vast continent and explore its wonders. In this case, I cast the panels of this sort of mock caravan out of the grains of the agricultural industry, which has cleared much of the land and biodiversity in this continent, which has the highest extinction rate of all continent land masses on planet Earth, with these grains that are grown agriculturally, which attracted the pigeon colonies and introduced bird species on the St Paul's Cathedral and the train station opposite, and slowly ate away this caravan, turning this sort of birdie bell into something of a cage. So I want to juxtapose this movement with a challenge that I seem to have, I don't know, it's just happened really, but of the last 5 years I've come into relationship with place-based living after having had most of my life and 30 years of kind of professional work around mobility, I'm now sort of, what is it to live in relationship to place when I have become a landholder of a 40-acre, 16-hectare area of land that has previously been exploited for its resources of timber, of granite, stone, such that it is being regarded as rubbish country by the agricultural sector, and now over a 50-year cycle is regenerated country. So I'm challenging notions of ownership with stewardship and custodianship. What is it to be a carer of land? There is a land care movement in Australia, which is particularly trying to attract the agricultural industry to reconsider the negative influences on healthy ecosystems which it's dependent upon. This is an area where I'm not only engaging with the land of which I have technically title, but also the larger collection of landholders in this area to recognise what is the role of private conservation in creating an increase of biodiversity within a particular area. So for me, it's a huge journey to be learning about ecosystems, about biodiversity, about particular species and interdependencies of species, which mobility has not taught me anything about. But what I am learning is a sense of stewardship and care, and particularly challenging those who are, like myself, the beneficiary of colonising processes of dispossession. What is it to engage with unsettling the settler priorities? It's uncomfortable, but we engage with species that are there. We engage with making judgments of how this landmass has always been managed. It's not a notion of romanticised wilderness or nature by itself, but humans have always been integrated into that landscape. So I'm finding that I'm also making decisions about invasive species which have negative impacts upon local indigenous species, and me being somehow the arbiter of which species to prioritise. So trapping feral cats, for example. One of the most profound areas in which this change for me is happening is working with the traditional custodians of this land and starting to learn about caring for land through particularly traditional practices of using fire. This is now a landscape which is of extreme fire risk due to reduced rainfall, and that is of course through climate change effects. So this is an extreme fire risk area, so returning to engage with cool cultural burning practices, right time, right fire, right country, that our traditional owners have known for time immemorial. But that's to give a little contrast to sort of place-based work. But really, I've been working with all sorts of ways of moving, including this project called, interestingly, Container Walk, which this sort of area is pretty familiar with, a container space. So this is a project where I walked into a shipping container, walking nowhere, walking for 3 days of an arts festival, walking for the 12, 14, 16, I can't remember, hours of opening of this arts festival in a public domain, walking on a bed of salt, walking in the industrialised shipping container that enabled global production and consumption systems, walking on sea salt, which is 3% of seawater, walking on salt, which enabled food preservation, which enabled urban settlements. So through a process of beginning a journey in a public space, this project turns into a social encounter with people meeting their own social inhibitions, prohibitions of what's possible. Can I step in here? What will happen if I step in here? Will he walk over me? Will he talk to me? What's happening here? So different events of social encounter happen. And slowly I introduced walking with the alliteration of talking, and talking with the with the rhythm of walking, and a kind of a language game starts happening, which shifts our sense of how to meet each other with a newness and strangeness to this encounter. What comes of it is something of a mode of public inquiry and pedagogy. This project's been done in a couple of different settings, day and night. Another project called Rise. Not only automobiles, but all sorts of movement, bicycles in a frontier culture, small sailing boats. I grew up with a father who transferred many skills of making to me, including his interest in boat making and his collection of maritime charts in his role as a librarian. He gave me this collection of charts of leisure sailors who have navigated around the world in their hobby craft. And in this project, I invite people to bear witness to the incoming tide. Of these charts, I turned them into a way of not the representational act of the colonial project to instrumentalise knowledge in that representational form, but to actually inhabit this relationship to knowledge, to consider it differently. I read out this planetary contract. This being will bear silent witness to the incoming tide. This being acknowledges the moon and its pull upon the waters of this planet as the moon and earth and sun and the other planets rotate. This being acknowledges and honours your ancestors and all ancestral knowledge and ancestral beings. This being acknowledges and honours the sovereignty of traditional custodians of this place and their knowledge and wisdom of living deeply interconnected with the waters, lands and skies of this planet and the stars beyond. This being commits to listen to the wisdom of all people and all species and all forces of life and to live justly with them. This being will bear silent witness to the incoming tide. This project was in Aotearoa, New Zealand, with the charts and the masks made of charts of the Pacific, which is facing the impacts of rising sea levels more than many other contexts around the planet. So small groups assemble for half-hour invitations to, in a meditative way, inhabit a different kind of relation to the water's edge, their own being in relation to each other, and global Earth systems phenomena. This project, Live House, again using the shipping container in a social housing estate in the inner city of Melbourne, where the demographics of that housing estate have changed radically over their 60-year life, from a sort of a following of the migration pathways to this continent. Firstly, waves of post-war Southern European migrants. This would be housing for them. Curiously, the transport sector would often provide the employment for new migrant communities. Then in the 70s, a rise of Vietnamese and Chinese cultures. And then in the 2000 and 2010s, 60% of this inner city housing estate occupied by new migrant communities from the Horn of Africa. And in the context of rising demands upon the use of land in the inner city and urban development, this public housing estate was under the pressure of public-private partnerships. So just as a signal to our BITS design colleagues, this project involved industrial design students developing Lifehouse vehicles that could enable these new migrant communities to inhabit a public space and to do what they wanted to do in that public space, from Ethiopian coffee cart to a communications cart, to a food cart, to a performance cart. So the shipping container becomes an instrument for temporary inhabitation of space which is not owned by any, but there's a sense of fluidity to who owns this space, who can host this space. So I play with the inversion of guest and host relations. These new migrant communities become the host of a temporary space to host others into a social encounter with each other through different kinds of events that they're interested in. Micro performances, micro trading, micro improvised performance encounters. A pedal-based project, Ride on Dinner, at the stage of where there was a lack of cycling infrastructure in urban cities around Australia. That's changed radically since this project of the late 2000s, which was about trying to induce a felt relation between human metabolism and energy systems, food systems in relationship to the urban and the rural, and transportation systems. A pedal-powered vehicle serves a 3-course vegetarian meal, appropriating different sites around the city for stages of the meal, which is served out of what is lawfully required in our context, a bicycle helmet. A tram-based project, not the first one. This one, W11 tram, where I invited Karachi vehicle decorators, chamakpatti wallahs, to crash a W11 Karachi minibus into a Melbourne tram, two iconic forms of transport, to end up with this project that hosted a different kind of space of encounter. These men are usually working on these minibuses, and then this tram circled the inner city of Melbourne for 1 hour lap of a free journey. People invited on board for 3 different hosted kinds of experiences. Conversations between strangers that I curated to meet and have a conversation of discovery over a 1 hour lap of the city, through to performance makers to share an improvised performance over 1 lap of the city, through to people doing whatever they wanted to do, which often ended up as dancing, which websites, tickets become a big part of a project like this and the repertoire of tramways projects that I have been working on for a number of years. So let me give you a few tickets out here. Maybe you can pass some back. And I can see my stops coming up soon, so I better keep moving. Other aspects of that project. But now to sort of get on track with the project Tram Jatra, imagining Melbourne and Kolkata by tramways. Jatra being in Bangla, journey. So a journey by tram. It started with my doing work with the tramways of Melbourne, with tramways workers, conductors and users, interested in the infrastructures of the city as a means to which to work artistically and creatively with a public pedagogy. I meet my now dear friend and collaborator of multiple decades, Roberto de Andrea, a conductor being phased out of the human service role in the transport sector in Melbourne. And we meet Devashish Bhattacharya, a chemical scientist from Kolkata, lobbying against the West Bengal government's intent to close the tramways of Kolkata. So we start a bicultural, bi-place dialogue of exchange and discovery and a journeying back and forth, which has had many different phases of what it is to conduct this relationship of trust between 2 different cities. And this idea of conduct. I've often considered myself a carriage artist. Can we just press that button somehow? The tram's moving faster than I thought. Can you do anything at your end to get rid of that? So various artworks and installations, a book, which I'll be leaving with people here, changing the Kolkata Tramways workers' uniform for 1 day as a way of introducing that book reflecting on that book by noticing that it actually fits in the groove of tramways, so dragging it to sort of reread the work that we've done as a reflective conversation. Not so appropriate in Kolkata. We just dragged the sticks. So of the last 12, 14 years, I've not participated in the ongoing work of this Tramjatra project, feeling that it was not quite expanding enough. There's been great efforts between particularly the filmmaker in Kolkata, one of the founding friends of this project, and Roberto, who's now a conductor who's no longer working on trams, but produces tickets of biodiversity and conservation information to continue that human role of what it is to pass and transmit an encounter through a ticket to meet someone and have an instrument or a tool to share knowledge. Pass some of these back and throw some more around. So there have been various iterations over the last few years which I've chosen not to participate in. But now it's coming to the point where we have another phase of this project called Sundarban Tramjatra coming up in March, April this year. To get us to the next phase, I know that we're interested in frameworks for projects. So I wanted to share the frameworks through which I started to consider those 4 transport-based projects that all are dependent upon an infrastructure, a set of social relations, and tactics of working with space, time, moments, movements, and momentum. There's a set of these on each of your tables that you will go to in the next room, including one for the next project phase coming up, which is this Sundarban Tramjatra. There's also a blank form. I think of them as something like a freight docket if you were to send a tram shipped from Melbourne to Kolkata. So there's also on your tables a set of tickets, sort of prototypes, if you like, always sort of trying to work through the medium itself. This Sundarban Tramjatra project is about a public festival of learning with climate change hotspots, learning with the entangled relationships between the largest mangrove system on Earth, the Sundarbans, and its neighbouring megacity, Kolkata, moving together towards hopeful futures with inspiration to self-empower, knowledge to seek justice, courage to bear witness, creative resourcefulness to adapt, and compassion to care for biodiversity. The rest of the tickets just give you some clues about modes of practice that can inhabit a framework and keep it open-ended and adaptable as a form of practice. I think that's my tram stop. Ding, 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 really loud. Thank you for your patience and time.